Hello and welcome to the Hoop Collective podcast. We talk about the NBA, which we're doing this week on Wednesday afternoon. Joining me from New York City, for those of you watching on YouTube, look at that beautiful new background in his beautiful new home. Now they settled in New York City. No more transition background in corporate housing. It's Tim Bontemps.
That's right. Hello, guys. How we doing?
And the man with a plan, the man who is in that sort of very artsy background if you're watching on YouTube, which, you know, you don't have to watch on YouTube. We love all of our listeners.
There was a time when McMahon was very invested in this YouTube background. Then it quickly went away, and now it's just a blank white
Well, here's the thing. No. It's a gray wall. Also, the Wi-Fi doesn't work that well in the office. So, like, to do something there would be a waste of time. But please continue with the introduction.
A mesh network. It's Ben McMahon.
Howdy, partners.
We have a couple of announcements at the start today.
Okay.
The first announcement is that next week there will be no Hoop Collective pod. I will be out of town, and I'm always out of town, but I will be out of the country, and we're taking the week off. We'll be back the week after that. In the event of major significant breaking news, we will of course do an emergency pod, but there will be no Hoop Collective next week. The other announcement is a preemptive congratulations, because this Saturday, our man Ben McMahon is getting married. Congratulations, McMahon. The whole Hoop Collective family is very happy for you. I hope everything goes great.
Well, I appreciate that. I'm looking forward to getting hitched to my IT department. It is going to be a wonderful ceremony that Wendy has declined to attend.
I was going to say the Hoop Collective
controversial.
I was going to say the Hoop Collective family feels so good about it that 1/3 of the pod will not be there.
Well, yeah, he has to congratulate me now because he told me he didn't have time for peons. He only attends.
That's right.
The management type of weddings. No, what happened here
That's right.
is ever since Bontemps referred to Wendy publicly as a jackass, he has refused to socialize with us. Even I thought that would, like, a wedding, I thought would be enough to kind of break the ice there, but apparently not. So looking forward to seeing Bontemps. I mean, to be honest, if I had to have one or the other, I'd have chose Wendy, but I didn't get to make the choice.
No, I will be there representing.
Yes, thank you for representing the Hoop Collective, Mr. Bontemps. Please,
that's what I'm here for.
When you sign the guest book, please sign my name. Previously scheduled vacation, but congratulations to you and Maria. I hope you have a wonderful day, and you'll be taking a little bit of time off from the pod. You'll be back relatively soon, but the honeymoon forthcoming. So congratulations to McMahon. Somebody loves him. Took a while.
Good lead in. It's a good lead into our topic on the pod today. McMahon,
you
big winner
correct.
of the summer.
That's right. So today we're looking at the winners and losers of the offseason. Now, granted, there's an asterisk here because with two, all-star players, one of them first ballot Hall of Famer, still on the trade block, although there's a decent chance neither of them are going to get traded before the start of training camp. But with two of them out there, the offseason is not complete. But for the time being, it looks like the offseason is quieted down. The free agent market is pretty much depleted, with the exception of Colin Sexton, who's restricted and in a holding pattern, probably until, up until the training camp, until we see if there's any other major moves that happen. We do have some extensions coming. Extensions in August. There's a whole bunch of players who can extend, which we'll talk about later in the month, but unlikely that's going to involve transactions. That's going to, or, players moving. That's going to involve players either committing or not committing. LeBron being at the top of that list. He is extension eligible next Thursday or Friday, I think. Doesn't mean
it's
he'll
August
sign
4th, next Thursday, I believe.
Okay. Doesn't mean he'll sign that day. There's a lot around that decision, which we'll talk about, but that'll probably be the more of the NBA sort of news, so to speak. So we're going to talk about the winners and losers. And we're going to start off with the winners in our view. Bontemps, if you had to declare right now, granted, it could change because there could be major trades later on, but sitting here as we are at the last week of July, who would you say is your winner, at least your top winner of free agency at this point?
The two teams that immediately come to mind to me that, because I think it's sort of a weird offseason that there isn't necessarily one thing that dramatically stands out, but I think that the two teams that stand out to me the most are the Celtics and the Sixers up here in the Northeast, and that the Celtics get Malcolm Brogdon and Danilo Gallinari, two guys that add some questions for them to me, temperament-wise in the locker room, obviously injury-wise. We'll see if they're both healthy when the games matter in May and June, but this team we saw really struggle on offense, especially in the finals, struggled throughout the playoffs at times offensively, makes their bench a lot deeper. I think they're the deepest team in the league. I think they should be the best team in the NBA next season during the regular season. I think they should win 60-plus games, have the number one seed in the East. And then I think Philly, we've talked about it a ton on the pod, but this team needed defense, athleticism, rebounding, toughness. They had DeAnthony Melton. They had Daniel House. They obviously had PJ Tucker. And they get a full off season where in theory, James Harden will be, if not the same player, better than he was next year. And this team was really good when they had him over the final couple of months of the regular season. So to me, those two teams should go into next season a lot better. And I think if you're looking across the East in particular, those two teams really stand out to me.
Yeah, those are the two teams that would be at the top of my list. The Celtics are particularly interesting. Obviously, go to the finals. I thought the Brogdon move addressed kind of their biggest need without sacrificing a single rotation piece. So, that's a very interesting move. I think, though, they have created some potential chemistry issues. And, you're bringing Brogdon off the bench. We're going to see how he accepts that role, perhaps a chance for him to play for a contender again. And Milwaukee was trying to build to that point. The Celtics are definitely there, but to play meaningful basketball again, perhaps he will be open to that, especially as the newcomer there. And then you've got this KD thing where Jaylen Brown would be the centerpiece. That to me, I get that it's Kevin Durant. I get why you would have the interest. I think they need to tread very carefully with the perception that they are dangling Jaylen Brown again, because, obviously he has been a core piece. He was the second best player on a team that went to Game 6 of the NBA Finals. He is underpaid given his production. You cannot extend him because he would be extending off of a contract that is below his value. And if he's not feeling loved when 2024 offseason comes around, I think there's going to be several attractive options for him. So just a little. Yeah,
let's talk about that a little bit. So Woj reported it, that the Celtics offered Jaylen Brown. The word, one of the things I've learned in covering the NBA at my time, the word offer it's a trigger word. Mm-hmm. For when you talk to executives and agents, whether it's hiring a coach, well, he was never offered the job. Well, okay. Because sometimes these teams, when they talk about concepts, sometimes there's actually a formal, here is what our offer is. And sometimes, talking about a concept it's not really an offer, and they can play with the language. But I mean, let's just be honest. If you're the Celtics and you call the Nets and you're having a conversation about Kevin Durant, right, you're going to have to offer high level players and draft picks. So,
and that conversation starts with Jason Tatum's off the table.
Of course. And
so who else is in the offer? I mean, come on.
Yeah. And I mean, look, Jaylen Brown is a smart person. If Jaylen Brown was running the Celtics, if he would probably offer his clone in a trade for Kevin Durant. Mm-hmm. Now, that doesn't mean that Jaylen Brown can't use it as a card, against not like he else use it against the team, but it doesn't mean he can't, have faux outrage. But, let's just be honest. If you're going to engage in the conversation, and if you're the Celtics, why wouldn't you call and investigate that? Now, Bontemps has talked about this for almost a whole year now, and he's been proven right because Brad Stevens has doubled, even tripled down on this. Danny Ainge was very reluctant to trade first-round draft picks. He did do it a couple of times. One of the best trades he made two big trades he made. One was for Isaiah Thomas, which was for a first, and one was for Kyrie Irving. He obviously gave an unprotected first, so it wasn't like never, but he was reluctant to do picks with first. That has not been the case for Brad Stevens. He has been the lead executive for 1 year, and he has traded, I think, 3 firsts. Isn't that right, Bontemps?
He traded 1 for Derek White. He traded 1 to get off of Kemba Walker and get Al Horford, and he traded 1 to get Malcolm Brogdon. So yeah, right. 3. I was counting it out as it went along.
I'm not sure that Ainge traded 3 in the last decade. He traded 1 for Kyrie and 1 for Isaiah Thomas. I don't have all the Celtics moves committed to memory, but
it's at least around the same amount he's traded in a long time. That's for sure.
Obviously, he traded some for Kevin Garnett back in 2007, but I'm not sure he traded that many after that. So the point is, when you start talking about trading with Boston, making trade, Brad Stevens being willing to give firsts, that's not an unreasonable thing. And so also Jaylen Brown is, there's that list of guys, whatever it is, 15 or 18 guys deep. It's actually gotten a little deeper since the Durant trade request that they can't trade for with Ben Simmons on the roster. Well, as MacMahon said, because Jaylen Brown is not, he's not on a max, he can be traded and be on the same team as Ben Simmons. And, Jaylen Brown, with all due respect, is not Kevin Durant. And regardless whether or not Durant was on the market or anything, they do have, in all probability, Jaylen Brown will get to unrestricted free agency in 2024.
Right.
Because his contract he is not under the rules. Does not behoove him to extend. Even if the Celtics had gone 82-0 in the playoffs in this regular season last year, 16-0 in the playoffs, and Jaylen averaged 80 points a game, he would not extend right now.
Right. The way that changes is if he makes All NBA next season, which I'll just say, if they're as good as I think they can be, and they have the best record in the league, and they win 60 plus games, I don't think it's out of the question that Jaylen Brown makes an All NBA team next year.
He doesn't turn the ball over every third time he has a possession. That's neither here nor there. Anyway,
but it's not, because listen, how many two-way wings are there that average 24, 7, and 3.5 assists? I mean, he's one of the best two-way wings in the league at age 25. If he doesn't make All NBA and he hits the market in 2024, obviously a lot can change between now and then, but I can run down a list of
any team with max cap space would be lining up to sign him.
And there could be a lot of teams with max cap space, including some that would be extremely attractive,
like one in Dallas, for example.
One in now you say, well, how many situations are there going to be where he can play with a player, as great as Tatum? Well, Dallas is certainly a possibility. Memphis with John Morant, we can argue, is Morant as good as Tatum, but whatever, that could be a contender. Cleveland with Mobley and that core in plays could be interesting. I mean, we can go on down the list. Again, a lot can change contractually between now and 2024, but I also think if there's the perception that Jaylen Brown is going to be on the market and considering options, there will also be teams that will plan to take a shot at him.
No question. I'm also on the record as saying I wouldn't do this trade if I was the Celtics, which I understand is, maybe a minority position, but I look at this Celtics team, and as MacMahon said, the most valuable thing you can find in the league right now are young two-way wing players. And the Celtics have built this team around 2 of them, in Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum. And the thing I've appreciated about what Brad Stevens has done since he's gotten this job last summer is he has actively tried to build around those 2 guys. In other words, he has looked at the team and said, we need to maximize what we have around these 2 guys. And every move they've made has been in that vein. And it's why they took off last season when they moved on from Dennis Schroeder and Josh Richardson, guys that weren't great fits. It's why Malcolm Brogdon, assuming, the chemistry with him and Marcus Smart doesn't get sideways, with him coming off the bench, and Marcus, certainly waited a long time to be the starting point guard. I think they want to make sure he feels comfortable that he is going to be the starter still. That's going to help them in terms of some of that extra shot creation they didn't have. But this team has been built around those 2 guys, and they have a chance, to me, to be a championship level team for the next 5 to 7 years, assuming that Jalen resigns. And I'm not giving that up even to take on Kevin Durant at this point, as great as Durant is, given the injury concerns you have, given the age concerns you have, and given the fact that the Celtics already are, to me, one of the 3 or 4 best teams in the league. If I'm making a trade like this for Kevin Durant, I got to get. Make the call. Yeah, sure, I get it. I'm just saying, for me, ultimately, I wouldn't be doing it, because if you look at the past at teams that have made this kind of trade to get a guy like Kevin Durant, you're a team that's not in the very top tier, that's trying to get in the top tier, and so it's worth taking the risk, because obviously there's some risk there to dramatically alter your team to get this guy. For me, the Celtics are already in that tier, and they're set up to be in that tier for 5 years. I wouldn't be sacrificing that.
Your point is, at the cost of Durant, you're not sure when the smoke clears whether or not you are a better team in the short to medium term. And that is also, by the way, the same situation that the Suns find themselves in, if they have to include Cam Johnson, Miles Bridges. At the time they were talking about 8-2. So
I disagreed on the Suns. I think all the other teams that have been talked about, Phoenix, Toronto, Miami, I think they all need to do everything. I mean, short of trading Scotty Barnes, I think all those teams need to do whatever they can to try to get KD, because of what it would do for their direction. I just think the Celtics, it doesn't change it much.
Well, the Suns, they're on the CP3 window, right? And
yes,
they'll retool around Booker, and I'm not saying they're done being relevant, but as far as like, they have a window as a contender that is tied to Chris Paul. The Miami Heat have a window as a contender, quasi-contender, however you want to define that, that's tied to Jimmy Butler. The Celtics window is tied to Jason Tatum, who is yet to hit his prime. Jaylen Brown, who is about to enter his prime. And I would be curious to see some nerd like Kevin Pelton put together
shrapnel. Pelton just took some shrapnel.
Nerd is
refer to him as the machine. Just refer to him as the machine.
The machine. And nerd is a complimentary term. It means he's smart and can crunch numbers in a way that I'm not capable of doing. But to put together a report that basically says, here's the probability, whatever kind of, figure out what the trade could look like. Here's the probability of the Celtics winning the championship if they pull off this trade next year, the year after, the year after. Because I'm going to say with KD, you're probably in a 3-year window versus the probability over 7 years if you don't make the trade. And just what those numbers, because I think you have to consider, yes, trading for Kevin Durant, I think you go from one of the 3 or 4 best teams to the favorite going into next season. But you are certainly shortening the window.
All right. But for the purposes of this discussion about winners in the offseason, I think you said it, MacMahon, they're bringing back their whole core, most of whom are young and in their prime, some of whom have room to grow. I mean, I think Robert Williams has room to grow. Grant Williams didn't have a great back end of the playoffs last year. He has room to grow. Tatum and Jaylen Brown are still getting better. And then
other than Al Horford, their whole team is either prime or younger age-wise.
Well, yeah, Gallinari's back end. But, you add Gallinari and Brogdon to a team that is still getting better. So that's why they're there. As far as Philly goes, while the fit of everything is still up in the air, a lot of it will determine around Harden. Because of the contract that Harden signed and the maneuvers they made, they were able to add 3 significant pieces to their roster: PJ Tucker, DeAnthony Melton, Daniel House, without subtracting any. Danny Green was traded, but he was going to be out for the whole season or pretty close to it. So again, you look at the sort of the same thing. They have their stars back and they're adding to it. And that's why you feel good about them stepping forward. Although,
well, I think they're adding pieces that you basically, how PJ Tucker fits with Harden. And honestly, how he fits with Embiid, because he's going to go stand in the corner, shoot 38, 40% on corner threes and guard his ass off. Daniel House understands that he's a role player here. So I don't really worry. DeAnthony Melton's always been a role player. The 2 issues with the Sixers are, it's always going to be Embiid's health. And is Harden, can he reverse the decline that we've seen over the last year?
And what does PJ go off a cliff? I mean, that's always at this point, PJ was the Bucks bet PJ couldn't do what he did with them when he left. Then he was great with the Heat last year. Might add his best season. Then obviously, the Heat wanted to keep him, but Philly is betting he could continue doing that at 38, 39, and 40 to some degree. That's a heavy bet. But as I mentioned earlier, he is literally exactly what they needed on a lot of fronts. Mm-hmm. And as we've talked about many times on the pod, it wasn't a mistake that after Game 6, the big fellow went on a 2-minute soliloquy about he's never had a player like PJ Tucker on his team. Well, now he has PJ on his team. So
all right, a couple more winners I wanted to talk about. For me, I think we should talk about Atlanta. They were a team that desperately needed some defense. They also needed to shake up their team a little bit. So getting DeJounte Murray in the type of trade they did give away, future firsts. But they added DeJounte Murray without subtracting any of their core players. This is in a prototypical player that you would want to put next to Trae Young, a guy who has really good defense, doesn't have to have the ball, but can handle the ball, great length and size that he can multiple positions and take pressure off of Trae. And even though they had John Collins hanging out there in the trade market, they still have Collins. They still have DeAndre Hunter. They still have Onyeka Okongwu, guys who they could use in future trades, or you can get better. This roster could still improve. Bogdan Bogdanović did have offseason knee surgery, so we'll see how he comes back. But you're looking at a significant upgrade to their roster. I don't know, Bontemps, where they shake out in the East with how competitive it is, but you can't look at them and say they didn't get better, I don't think.
Yeah, I think they got better. I wouldn't have had them in the winner category just because I'm not sure how much better they got. I love DeJounte Murray, though. I think
it was a heck of a trade.
Yeah, he's a good player. I mean, they gave up a lot to get him. And, again, I'm not sure how much it changed their trajectory. But, again, that's a trade where if assuming DeJounte, who's like Jaylen Brown, signed to too low a contract to realistically extend him, if he resigns in a couple of years when his deal is up and you have him and Trae Young for the next 5 to 7 years, sort of like we're talking about the Celtics, then yeah, I think that's a trade that could work out really well for them. If you're talking about the
I don't
next 2
think they're
years,
done. I think there's another transaction coming for them.
Yeah.
I'm not saying in the next 2 weeks, but there will be another transaction for them to make.
It feels like they're not done dealing.
This sets them up, though. This opens a lot of doors for them and should make them better.
Yeah, he should be a great fit next to Trae.
I think the only reason to not automatically put them in the winner category is you can argue, hey, did they give up too steep of a price in terms of the picks to get DeJounte Murray? But there's no question that he makes them much better, not just because of the way I think he will fit with Trae Young, but the fact that the Hawks offense went from elite to awful when Trae Young rested. And now they've got a guy who can run the show when Trae Young's on the bench. He can also handle the ball when Trae Young's in the game and take some pressure off him, let him play off the ball where, I think you'll see him be able to do, I'm not saying he's Steph Curry, but some Steph-like things. And when they get into the playoffs, a team can't just say, hey, we're going to do everything we can to make Trae Young's life miserable because they don't have anybody else on that roster that can make us pay for doing that. Well, they do now.
So, yeah, I just think your points about what they gave up are accurate. I just think if you're going to give up multiple firsts, make it for a all-star in his mid-20s under contract.
Yep.
And his contract, he's got the same situation as Jaylen Brown. He makes 16.5 this year and 17.7 next. By the way, next year isn't even guaranteed because remember when he signed the contract, he was coming off the ACL, the extension with the Spurs. So there's just no way he's extending that contract. I mean, obviously you never say never. So they're going to probably have to deal with him as an unrestricted free agent in 2024. But, if you're going to trade multiple firsts, go after a mid-20s in his prime all-star under contract. Bontemps, you and I talked about this yesterday, and you had, I think I agreed with you. I agree with you now. You had the Minnesota Timberwolves in the winning camp in the offseason with their big Rudy Gobert trade. And it was a big trade. And I agree, right? I mean, to add a player like Rudy Gobert, we'll talk about the cost here in a second, but you can't deny that they should be significantly better defensively.
Yeah, I think if you're just talking about, by the way, another winner of the offseason that we didn't talk about yesterday is Jalen Brunson, who we'll get to more in a bit. But him getting paid the number he did after what he was willing to sign, and Dallas was not willing to sign him for a few months ago, he is a big winner. But we'll get to that in a bit. But yeah, I think when you look at Minnesota, set aside the cost of the trade for a second, because obviously that is a significant factor down the road. But to me, if you're just talking about next season and looking at this team, I think you can make an argument that this Minnesota team is a better version of what Utah has been, which has been a 50-plus win team the past few years. We're talking about a Minnesota Timberwolves team that has made the playoffs once, I guess this year twice in 20 years, right? So like if you tell Minnesota Timberwolves fans, hey, the next 3 or 4 years, your team's going to win more than 50 games a year, probably after this trade. To me, if I'm a Wolves fan, I'm really excited because they've never had that kind of run since KG left, or really even since the last couple of years KG was there. So that's why I look at them as a win. I obviously there's questions about them in the playoffs. We'll see how Cat and Rudy fit in terms of being able to play playoff level defense. But we all love the Ant-Man on the pod. He is certainly on the ascension. Rudy is, I think, the best regular season minimum regular season defensive player in the league. I think he's going to dramatically raise their floor at that end of the court. And Towns and Ant-Man will do more than enough scoring to have them still be an awesome offensive team. So I think, like I said, it's purely looking at on the court next season. I think Minnesota's going to be awesome. And I really like where they're headed from that standpoint.
Well, and I heard Cat at his press conference after signing his Supermax extension, he's talking about it's championship or bust now. No, it's not. This is the Minnesota Timberwolves, a franchise that has advanced in the playoffs one time in the 33-year history of the franchise. They damn near held a parade when they won in the play-in tournament. Okay, if this team wins the first round, that's a monumental accomplishment for that franchise. So, we can argue, hey, is this Timberwolves core, does that project to be good enough to win a championship? But at a certain point, dude, if they are relevant and can win a playoff series, a few playoff series over the next 4 or 5 years, then I think you can argue the trade is worth it. Although, like we all know, I mean, I'm a Rudy Gobert guy, but man, they gave up a lot.
Well, we'll talk about that in a second. I want to also talk. Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead. All I was going to say was the only thing I would say to rebut your point at all is that I do think it's championship or bust only in the standpoint that if you trade that many picks for somebody, to me, that's saying you believe you're a championship level team, right? Like Minnesota doesn't trade all those picks to win one playoff series in theory, right? They're doing that because they think Rudy with Ant-Man and Carl makes them a championship level team. I'm not sure it does. And I think you're right. If they are just like I just said, if they're the Jazz the next 4 years and they make the second round 4 times or make the conference finals once, that's the best run the franchise has ever had. So it's not like people look at
literally
it and
ever.
say it's a fail. Right. So it's not like people look at that and say it's a failure. But I do think when you make a trade at that cost, you are setting yourself up for that to be the standard that you're going up against on some level. Is that this is a trade we think makes us that good.
Let's talk about the rest of their offseason real quick. So that was their 2 big moves, the Gobert trade and extending Towns. They made some signings. So they signed Kyle Anderson, who
really nice move.
They signed him for 2 years and about 18 million or 19 million. I think next year, no, it's not non-guaranteed, it's guaranteed. But that, like he's not gonna be a difference maker, but he's a quality player, quality veteran player. They signed, a couple of minimums. Now, look, I'm not going to sit here and spend a lot of time talking about Bryn Forbes and Austin Rivers, but those are decent signs. Bryn Forbes shoots over 40% from three in his career, and Austin Rivers, you can't count on him every night, but he is a quality rotation player. They had an aggressive free agent season for a team that didn't have any money to spend. Okay, now I want to talk about the trade. This has been the biggest topic of conversation with me to executives for the last couple of weeks. Obviously, you're always talking about Durant and then Donovan Mitchell, but this is what they remain agog at it.
Is that a word?
Yeah.
I don't think it is.
Agog.
Agog. I think, yeah. Agog is a word.
Or whatever.
You said it with a K the first time.
Usually the words I don't know are much longer.
All right. They remain amazed by it.
Oh, agog. Very eager or curious to hear or see something. They are agog to see how this is going to work out.
Yeah. The
education McMahon continues.
I was one executive who was, I wouldn't say he was making fun of them, but he was just like, they were thrilled internally that they were able to keep Jaden McDaniels and thought, boy, that was a real win in the deal that we kept Jaden McDaniels, because Jaden McDaniels is a interesting developmental player. But they, internally they were like, and he was basically saying, that's what
he's a quality starter with major developmental potential. A developmental player tells me he's like a 12th man they're hoping can become a rotation player.
That's fair. Anyway, the point the guy was making was like, they were, evaluating the trade afterwards, like, man, we kept Jaden McDaniels as if they got a win in that negotiation.
And Danny Ainge is swimming in picks. He's doing like back pedals and stuff and all the picks that he got.
Yeah. So,
backstrokes.
This is one of those deals that we could discuss it routinely for the next 5 to 8 years, just like we did that Nets Celtics deal. It all depends on how this works. Now, I think this, Gobert is at least still in his prime, unlike Garnett and Pierce, who were clearly past their primes.
Mm-hmm.
But the price is higher. And the other thing is, it's not real clear to me that when the games really, really matter, and granted, Bontemps is right, for the Wolves, the games that matter could be the ones that get them into the playoffs proper, not even the play-in. Those are the games that could matter. But when you get into when the really is, chips on the line, like they were against Memphis, nobody is 100% sure whether Gobert and Towns can be out there at the same time, whether that's going to work.
Well, and you might be putting Rudy back in a similar situation as he was in the playoffs with the Jazz, where he's going to have to clean up a lot. Now, I think Jaden McDaniels is a better defender than anybody that he played with in Utah. Royce O'Neal is certainly a try-hard guy and a quality defender, but he's 6'4". McDaniels is 6'10", athletic. And then, not that scoring points was the Jazz's problem in a lot of their playoff failures, but I've said it before, I do think that these are the two best offensive talents that Gobert has ever played with. Now, Donovan Mitchell is a better offensive player to this point than the Ant-Man, but I think you can look at the Ant-Man and project him to surpass Donovan Mitchell. And then, Cat, for as much as we make fun of him, he does have an argument for one of the greatest shooting big men of all. Not one of his argument is he is. I'm never gonna. I need to.
He's a tremendous scorer. Just whatever else you want to say about him, he is an incredible scorer.
He's an all. Look, they have 2 All NBA players. The guys were All NBA players. Gobert and Karl Towns. They're All NBA players, and Anthony Edwards has All NBA.
He might be an All NBA player this year. Yeah. Anthony Edwards. Like that it wouldn't stun me if that happened. It surprised me a little, but it wouldn't stun me.
As much as we're talking about the fit on the defensive end come playoff time, I do think how it all comes together offensively is going to be very interesting. Is Gobert going to spend a lot of time in the dunker spot? Is he, what he does best is pick and roll, dive hard to the rim, lob threat. Well, if he's doing that, How involved is Cat going to be? Is Cat going to be, spend a lot of time spotting up on the weak side?
Cat loves to shoot. We know that.
Well, I was going to say, if that's the case, you've got to make sure that Cat's getting up 10 or 11 threes per game, which is not a bad idea. But I do trust Chris Finch to figure out how to make all that work. I do give him credit for being he's a
really smart offensive coach.
Yeah, really smart and creative.
And an Ohio State fan.
I won't hold that against him.
He averaged 6 threes a game last year, Towns.
That should go up.
I'm sure it will. Be surprised if it won't.
Bontemps, let me ask you this before we move on. D'Angelo Russell is the last year of his contract, $31 million this year. What do they do with D'Angelo Russell?
I think they're going to try to trade him. That'd be my guess. I mean, I think they're going to try to turn him into a better player. I mean, that's the other thing that is worth looking at with this team is that's sort of the one chip that's sitting out there, right? It's like they've got this $31 million expiring contract. But if you look at it, like they've got their big three. Now they've got this other salary slot. What do they turn it into? Because to me, that's the one interesting sort of looming question with this team. If they could take him and turn him into a couple of players that better fit around those guys and give him some more defense and some more, some more of the kind of stuff they maybe need in the playoffs. I think their ceiling goes up that much higher. Well, I meant more defense around their other three guys. Anybody is going to do more defense than D'Angelo.
Defense. Yeah. I look at D'Angelo Russell a lot like I look at John Collins in Atlanta, and we're talking different positions, different contractual situations, but these are guys who big salaries, and I don't think they're there much longer. Right. And the question is, can the Hawks flip Collins for something that makes them better? Can the Wolves flip Russell for something that makes them better?
They both had discussions and haven't figured it out yet. Okay, before we move on, any more winners?
I think that basically covers it.
Starting your own small business can be a total roller coaster. Between all the ups and downs, twists and turns, and highs and lows comes the actual business side of your business, which can really throw you for a loop. Luckily, with QuickBooks, you can get paid, run payroll, and know where your business stands from the start. So no matter how bumpy the ride gets, you can always stay on track. New business? No problem. Success starts with Intuit QuickBooks. Learn more at QuickBooks.com. QuickBooks Payroll, QuickBooks Payments, and QuickBooks Online account required. That sound has to make you smile. It's the sound of another sale on Shopify, the all-in-one commerce platform to start, run, and grow your business. Shopify gives entrepreneurs the resources once reserved for big business, so upstarts, startups, and established businesses alike can sell everywhere, synchronize online and in-person sales, and effortlessly stay informed. Scaling your business is a journey of endless possibility. Shopify has the tools and resources that make it easy for any business to succeed, from down the street to around the globe. Reach customers online and across social networks with an ever-growing suite of channel integrations and apps, including Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Pinterest, and more. Synchronize your online and in-person sales. Gain insights as you grow with detailed reporting, conversion rates, profit margins, and beyond. More than a store, Shopify grows with you. This is Possibility, powered by Shopify. So go to shopify.com/hoop, all lowercase, for a free 14-day trial and get full access to Shopify's entire suite of features. Grow your business with Shopify today. Go to shopify.com/hoop right now. Shopify.com/hoop. Before we move on, it's trivia time. Presented by CarMax, online or on the lot, with home delivery in select markets. That means Timothy Bontemps is up. What do you have for us?
So we talked a lot about the KD situation this summer and the idea of him changing teams. And there are, given obviously he's a great scorer, Celtics made the finals. Made the finals last year. There are 4 players in NBA history that have scored 25 points per game or more the season before that joined a team that made the finals in the offseason. Who are those 4 players?
Who joined a team that made so a team
like-
coming off of a finals appearance.
Yes.
Like what KD did with the Warriors.
Yeah, KD
is obviously one of the four. So that's an easy one. So who are the other three? They've all happened since 1980.
Oh, all since 80.
Or since the merger. Moses Malone is one of them.
Karl Malone isn't one, is he?
Karl Malone didn't score enough. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
So we've had two of the four, right?
You have two of the four. You have the two easy ones.
Oh, great.
The other two are I don't want to say they're trick answers, but they're tricky answers. I'll even give you another hint. They've happened within the last 10 years.
Within the last 10 years.
Okay. Well, we have to think about LeBron's teams because LeBron.
Oh, yeah, exactly.
They could never import talent. So I don't think that happened. Andre would Iguodala.
I don't advantage that much.
Nope.
Al Horford? No, Al Horford didn't.
No,
do
he
it.
never
Al Horford never scored nearly enough points.
25 points. That's a lot of points.
Like I said, think about their tricky answers, and they happen.
I'm trying to think.
Years.
Is there some like Carmelo's not?
We talked about one of the transactions that involved them on the pod earlier. Came up.
Pure Ray Allen.
Later than that.
No.
Later than that.
Well, this is becoming boring, so just go ahead.
Yeah, come on,
I'll give you one final hint. There are two guys that have had serious injury issues that change teams. See if that triggers it in the last few years.
Kawhi Leonard.
Nope. All right, you guys lose. One of them was Isaiah Thomas, who was traded for Kyrie Irving from the Celtics to the Cavs in the offseason. That was
a trade, yeah.
The other one was DeMarcus Cousins signing with the Warriors.
Oh, man, that is a tricky one. That's a tricky one.
So there you go.
Yeah.
Those are the four guys.
We were right to look at the Warriors and Cavs. We just didn't think about the right transaction.
Andre Iguodala averaged 8.9 points per game.
Every guy you guys said was just one role player that scored less points over time. I was like, geez.
Let me just say that in Cleveland, Isaiah Thomas was never a 25-point scorer.
No, did he score 25 his whole time?
I mean, one of the things I will remember most in my time covering the league is when LeBron hit the shot the night before Isaiah got traded, and Isaiah tried to join in the celebration and was dismissed.
Rude.
Dismissed.
The backstory of that is not that we want to go down this rabbit hole. Is LeBron had found out earlier that day that they were trading. It was the night before the trade deadline.
Yes,
and they had told him we're trading Isaiah Thomas tomorrow. They did a whole series of trades they couldn't do at that time. So LeBron hit a game winner and then just acted as if he wasn't on the team anymore because in LeBron's head he was not on the team.
Yeah,
that's why that was amazing. Yet he was back with the Lakers, so whatever. All right. So we've done this on our, on some videos over the last couple of weeks where we take a look at some teams in the league before we get into the losers in free agency. For lack of a better term, and, I'm a little bit loath to go with this branding, but whatever, we're calling it What's Going On With. And we did it with the Mavericks and we did it with the Pistons. So we're now going to bring it into the main pod. The other ones are available on YouTube, on the YouTube channel, but now we're going to bring it into the main pod. So what's going on with the Denver Nuggets as we take a look at their moves and what's headed forward. The Nuggets made three significant moves this offseason. One, they signed Nikola Jokic to a contract extension. which was kind of a no drama because Jokic said at his exit interview, "Yeah, I'll sign it." It was like the greatest. It was like the greatest extension for an MVP in league history. And of course, they lost their general manager or team president, I guess his title was Tim Connolly, to Minnesota. Calvin Booth was promoted behind him. But the two significant maneuvers they made to their roster, they traded for Kentavious Caldwell-Pope and then subsequently extended him 2 more years. He was on the last year of his contract, making $14 million. They extended him 2 years at $30 million, $15 million a year, a reasonable extension. And then their significant free agent signing was, no, not DeAndre Jordan, was Bruce Brown.
I was going to say.
That was a little bait for you, MacMahon. They signed Bruce Brown away from the Nets on a 3-year deal, actually a 2-year deal, player option second year, for the taxpayer mid-level, as they are going to be a taxpayer this year. So the big thing about the Nets, MacMahon, is that, everything about them is the health of Jamal Murray and Michael Porter Jr. Porter Jr. gave an interview in Vegas Summer League saying that he was feeling good, expected to be back. I don't know if we can count on that, but I think any discussion about the Nuggets starts with the health of those two guys. Those are their second and third best players.
Right, because if those guys are healthy, this is a legitimate contender. This is a team that, without those two guys, was a playoff team. Jokic is, 2-time MVP. We can debate, where he ranks as far as players you want to have on your roster, but it's a very short list. They did give up Monty Morris, who's a quality player for them, to get Caldwell Pope, but with Murray coming back and Bones Highland,
they're big believers in Bones Highland.
Yeah, and that's a bet that I'm willing to make too. He was a luxury, and so what they've done is they've gotten 2 guys in Brown and Caldwell Pope, who I think fit really well, complementing their core. Murray is going to be a year and a half removed from the ACL. I'm willing to bet on him being at least close to what he was before, which would be a really, really good second option. The wild card to me, because of his back and because of his head, is Michael Porter Jr. If you're getting kind of the peak version of him, then you're getting one of the best catch and shoot scorers in the league. A 6'10" guy with a beautiful stroke, with a quick release, who kind of knows how to move without the ball, who fits really well playing off of Jokic and Murray. But who knows what you're getting from him? And I would say the one big mistake that Tim Connolly made during his tenure running the Nuggets was giving him that full rookie max extension without the injury protection. It's a risk that
we gave it to him about scary. 3 months before he needed another surgery, which I mean, it was a risk no matter what. But the fact that he immediately maybe even was hurt already, I don't know. But actually, I don't know. Let me take that back. I don't know that he was hurt already. But why did he fall to 14th in the draft? A guy who was considered the number 1 overall pick. Taking him 14th in the draft and giving him $170 million are two different discussions.
Right. Great pick at 14th. You needed to at least mitigate that risk on the max extension. And again, mainly because of the back, but also there's been a lot of things with him that don't necessarily scream reliability.
Yeah. I mean, you hit the nail on the head across the board. If this team is healthy, they're one of the 3 or 4 best teams in the West, I think pretty clearly. We saw them very briefly with the 4 guys together, Jamal, Murray, Porter, Jokic, and Gordon. They looked really, really good. I love the Bruce Brown signing. I think he's got a chance to be a fantastic fit there. Like, you look at Jokic with his ability to hit cutters, like the way Bruce plays, cutting to the basket, being a pest on defense at the other end. Like, I think he's an awesome fit there. I really like that move when it happened early on in free agency. And while they saved money doing the Monty Morris trade with him and Will Barton for Kentavious Caldwell-Pope and Ish Smith, KCP is a guy that gives them another 3-and-D guy on the wing, a more natural 3-and-D guy than a guy like Will Barton. So that could potentially help them too, but it all does come down to health. Does Jamal come back? I mean, look, Jamal Murray's a great player. He also hasn't made an all-star team yet. Like, does he have another level to go in addition to being healthy? Can he get back and sort of take one more leap? Can Michael Porter, as you said, get on the court? But you have that group of guys together and they're all healthy. I think they're going to be a really tough out in the playoffs next year. And Jokic has caught a lot of grief for losing in the playoffs the last 2 years. He lost in the last 2 years with the second and third best players on the team not playing.
Right.
So, let's see what happens this year if those guys are healthy and ready to go when it gets to playoff time.
We'll say this: the Nuggets haven't paid the luxury tax in 12 years. So they're going into the tax with this team. It's not something that the Cronkies have done a lot before. Obviously, when you have and they're going into the tax basically because they, it's not so much for Jokic. They're going into the tax because they decided to pay Michael Porter. So he's a huge swing piece for them. I don't think he has to be a superstar for them to be a contender, but he's got to be really good. So that'll be interesting. And, the one thing that they have been able to do really effectively over building this team was they've drafted very well and they've developed those players. Jokic was a pick. Murray was a pick. Porter was a pick. The
Bones Highland is a late first round pick
for sure. And they've had other guys that were successful picks that they've traded for. So, the key is going to be, can they continue to use that pipeline? Are they going to still be able to develop around these guys? Because they need Bones Highland to be really good. The decisions they made this offseason to set that up.
They need Zeke Naji to be good too. I mean, you talk about DeAndre Jordan, but the moves they made this summer have opened up a lot of playing time for him. He's a pretty interesting young guy too. He's another guy that's got to be good. So there's a lot of questions, but there's also a lot of upside. They could be a really, really, really good team.
Yeah, and we do, they will be a really good offensive team. If Porter's healthy, they will be a great offensive team. And then the question is with Jokic, despite the fact that he has made drastic improvements as far as a team defender, but can you build a contender caliber defense around Jokic? And if you're going to do that, the move for Aaron Gordon was certainly a step in the right direction. We didn't see it a lot, but remember how good their record was after the Gordon trade before Murray got hurt. Getting Caldwell Pope, getting Bruce Brown, they've got these pieces, having DeAndre Jordan really motivating them, waving a towel on the bench.
Right. If you look at their last three significant acquisitions, Gordon, Caldwell Pope, Bruce Brown, they've all been defensive based acquisitions. So that, at least shows a vision there. Okay. Now we want to move on to last season or this off season's, the teams we have in the sort of the loser category. There's some teams that could be called losers here that we could end up sliding to winners. There could be some teams that are right now in the middle that could slide to losers. We granted asterisk this with more moves to be made, but from what we've seen, Bontemps, who do you have at the unfortunate top of the?
Don't be starting with me. Start with the other Tim on this one. There's
Mr.
a pretty obvious choice we need to start with.
You gotta start with the Mavericks. Jalen Brunson was obviously a huge part of this team that made a West Finals run. Mark Cuban, Nico Harrison made it clear going in the offseason, keeping Jalen Brunson was their top priority. And it's not that they lost a bidding war. They basically said, we're not going to try to outbid that with the Knicks. The price got too high. What would it have taken to keep Jalen Brunson? I don't know. And the Mavericks weren't willing to find out ultimately once it got to 26 a year. Could they have given him 5 for 130 and kept him? I don't know. I don't know if that would have worked or not. Would it have had to be 5 for 140? Who knows? But they lost their second best player for nothing. Now, when we've talked about this, kind of what they're feeling is, hey, we weren't comfortable paying that much for a guy who they didn't think was a perfect fit with Luka. Getting Tim Hardaway back from injury, they feel like replaces some of the scoring. They turned a first-round pick and 4 end of bench guys into Christian Wood that gives them some more scoring there. I am extremely curious to see, 1, how things work out with Christian Wood, and 2, what exactly is his role going to be. Are you starting him at power forward where it's a weird fit, or are you bringing him off the bench where I think you're really risking some unhappiness, chemistry concerns with a guy who considers himself a star in a contract year? They did sign JaVale McGee and immediately anointed him as a starter. That was basically in the terms of the contract.
Yeah,
and so it's going to be interesting.
Odd. Yeah, I didn't like hardly anything they did at all. Like, you can understand in a vacuum not signing Jalen Brunson, right? What makes it a disastrous thing for them isn't that they didn't pay him $110 million, that they didn't pay him 55 6 months ago on the 0.1% chance they could put him in a trade for a star player. There was no trade that was coming down the pipe that was going to make sense for them to do that. And he would have been an incredible bargain. Like, if he was signed to that contract right now with Dorian Finney-Smith, like the same one Dodo signed a couple of months later, we'd be looking at them as huge winners going forward, because they'd have two key pieces signed to great contracts going forward, and they'd still have all the cap space down the road to add to this team. Instead, they lose Jalen Brunson. They bet on Christian Wood, who was a guy that had been hanging out there for a while for teams to go get in trades, and nobody had been willing to trade for, and that Dallas decided to give up a pick for because they sort of had to, because of the position they backed themselves into. And then even signing JaVale to be their starting center is a bizarre move. Like, that's your move when you have a couple of centers on the roster already, is to spend the tax MLE to go add JaVale McGee as a lob threat. Like, I don't know. We'll see what happens with their team. I didn't like their offseason one iota.
I will say the thought process with JaVale was basically nice guy, Dwight Powell, but the playoffs, they didn't think he's a playoff caliber player, right? And
what is JaVale?
Well, they believe so. And they believe he's a 20-ish minute per game starter. They felt like that their weaknesses were they were getting their butts kicked on the boards. They feel like he'll help that. And they feel like he gives them a legitimate rim protector. And now, again, we'll see. I'm not saying I'm giving that move 2 thumbs up. That's an inside JaVale McGee joke from his last Mavericks tenure. But that's their logic there. Now they feel like they have the flexibility to play that traditional pick and roll. Because with Luka, look, I do think JaVale McGee playing 20 minutes might average 10 points per game on 5 dunks a game playing with Luka Doncic, right?
Sure.
So they're giving Luka that legitimate, big, athletic lob threat off the pick and roll, who can protect the rim, who can clean up the glass. And then obviously they still have Maxi Kleba, so they still have, and Christian Wood. So they've got a couple options.
Let me ask you this.
Able to play 5 out.
Spencer Dinwiddie, after the trade last year, now he will be sort of the second year off the surgery for the ACL. He never shot the ball better in his career than the games he played with Dallas. It was 23 games. It was a quarter of a season. It's a sample size that's not substantial, but he never shot the ball better. He shot the best 3-point percentage, shot the best overall percentage. Mm-hmm. He averaged 16 points. Is there a window for Spencer Dinwiddie, especially being healthier, to have a huge year here and change your viewpoint of their horizon?
Well, that's definitely a huge part of the hope. And look, when they made that trade for, you can call it the Dinwiddie trade, we all understand what that trade was. They decided Kristaps Porzingis is not a fit. And as soon as they didn't have to give up a first-round pick to get off him, they did. They took back 2 contracts that the Wizards were eager to get off of. Spencer Dinwiddie was one of those contracts. I would say Bertans is the other. Bertans is whatever, your 9th or 10th man, making $16 million a year. Dinwiddie at $19 million a year is not a bad deal now, right? He is, as you mentioned, further removed from that ACL. He showed you that he could fit in Dallas, that he could contribute, that he could play well. I'm not going to bet on him shooting that percentage from 3 when he'd never done it before in his career. But look, with Brunson's departure, he slides into the starting lineup. He's certainly going to have opportunity, and they absolutely need him. Matter of fact, one of the other failures of this offseason is the fact that they only have 2 ball handlers on the entire roster with Brunson's departure. They could have signed Goran Dragic, but according to what he said on a podcast in Slovenia, they basically told him, you're not going to play a whole lot. Luka loves you. If you want to slide into that towel waving 15th man role, if you want to be a shorter version of Boban, that's cool. We got a spot for you. And he was like, "What you talking about, dude? Like, I can still play." And honestly, apparently they don't think that he still has that, but they need another ball handler. What happens in the 10 to 12 games that Dinwiddie probably has to sit out? The 10 to 12 games that Luka probably has to sit out, if not more, given those guys' track record. Like, they need more ball handling on this roster.
Yeah, I mean, look, Spencer could definitely play well this year, but that's not going to take away from the fact that they lost Jalen Brunson for nothing. And like, that's just, you can't lose pieces like that for nothing, especially when it's because you screwed up in your evaluation of him 6 months earlier. That's really the disaster here. It's not that.
Well, they kind of made two mistakes. They mishandled the extension. Okay, we don't need to beat them over the head about that anymore. We got it. The other thing is they misjudged what the Knicks could do in terms of creating cap space. And they still could have done a sign and trade with the Knicks if they were if they handled, I think, it a little bit differently. Because even if they had done a sign and trade, they would then have a
trade
PPE
exception they could do something with, right?
Yes. And
kind of like they got for Josh Richardson last year. I mean, I hear what you're saying, but how often do those trade exceptions turn into anything?
Well, it leaves open some windows for the next year.
Yeah. But if they have to give something up to make that happen, I don't know about that. But I think that like
the Celtics, when they lost Gordon Hayward, they created a trade exception. They were able to do some stuff with it.
Sure.
I mean, granted, I think the Fournier was one of the big things they did with it, but that didn't work out. But they were able to roll it over and do some things. I think, they're getting literally nothing back.
And that hurts when it's your second best player and you get nothing back. That hurts. Yep. Not doing the extension when they could have hurts. And honestly, like you said, they miscalculated the market. They said these cap space teams aren't going to be fits for him, and the Knicks can't create that cap space. And the Knicks created that cap space a hell of a lot easier than certainly the Mavericks anticipated, and I think any of us anticipated.
Yeah.
Bontemps, we have some players who we think had a bad summer, but any other teams that you want to talk about?
Yeah, the two teams that stand out to me are the Suns and the Heat. Two teams that, as McMahon pointed out earlier when he talked about Phoenix, they have a very small window with Chris Paul, right? And they are either right now the same team they were last year or worse. And the Heat, obviously, again, Jimmy Butler's your best player. You have a fairly small window, and they're worse with PJ Tucker leaving. Like they don't really have a power forward on the roster now. And, for those teams going into next season, teams that have designs on being in the NBA Finals and trying to win a championship, as they stand right now, those teams have taken a step back. Now, obviously, they have been talked about as being in the mixer, Kevin Durant and Donovan Mitchell, or not Donovan Mitchell in Miami's case. I don't think Miami has the ammo to get either of those guys. If they somehow pull off one of those trades, this is one of those scenarios where that could drastically change in the next 2 months. But between that, and again, we've talked about it a bunch with Miami, they also have a pretty interesting situation set up with Tyler Hero where they have to decide sometime between now and the start of the season whether they'll pay him. My guess is they will not pay him because then they can't trade him, and they'll want to have the ability to trade him during the season if it comes up. But I think those two teams being stuck in neutral, when you look at Denver getting healthy, the Clippers getting healthy, the teams in the West that are going to be really good, I think that's a loss for them. And again, PJ going to a direct rival, Boston getting better, Milwaukee getting healthy, Brooklyn still not having traded their guys. You look around the East, to me, Miami is taking a step back, and that makes them a loser for me too.
Well, and with the Suns, when you have the best record in the league coming off a finals appearance and lose the way that they did in the playoffs, you don't just, sweep that, dust that thing under the rug and keep on moving. No, that is the kind of, when you get kicked in the lower region like that, the pain endures, that lingers. And
we saw that in Utah last year.
We saw in Utah, we've talked about the 06 going into, the 07 Mavs, and, you have to do something to kind of jolt the franchise, to reinvigorate the franchise. And the way things went down with DeAndre Ayton, where basically we don't think you're a max player. Well, crap. Now we got to give you, we got to sign you to this max because we don't have any choice. Indiana, pushed us into the corner on that. I just, the friction between him and Monty Williams that emerged, like, dude, there's just a lot of weird energy around that franchise, not to mention the whole Sarver situation.
Let me say a couple things about the Suns. You could argue that their incredible dominance in clutch play last year, one of the greatest clutch play teams since we've been keeping clutch play stats, may have masked how actually good of a team they were. That if you played that season out 4 or 5 times, that maybe 64 wins was the best possible thing that could have happened. Maybe they were actually, even though I was incredibly impressed with them throughout the season, I spent a significant amount of time around them. I was impressed with their focus. I was impressed with the way they handled their business. I liked the way that they were built. You could argue that maybe their record wasn't indicative of their actual quality as a contender. I'm not necessarily arguing that, but I've heard it argued. But I also will say a couple of things. Number one, I think Mikal Bridges has more to grow. I don't think he's just a 3-and-D player. I think he has a window to have a bigger role. I think he can be more than he's shown. He had a couple of moments in the playoffs last year where he showed it. I don't know if they're going to design their team in a way that's going to allow him to do that, but I think there's more to Mikal Bridges than just being a dogged defender who hits some corner threes. I think he can do a lot more, and I would encourage them to look for ways to do him more, especially if you're looking to take some of the pressure off of Chris Paul a little bit. I think Mikal Bridges can be more involved in their offense. I think the same thing about DeAndre Ayton. I've thought about this for a couple of years. Now, there are people who are either pro Ayton or anti Ayton. I think Bontemps has pointed out, amongst other people, the guy does not get to the line. And that makes it a lot harder to run stuff for him because he doesn't hunt scoring. The guy shoots over 60% and he shoots jumpers. I think you could run some more for him too. So I think that there's potential on that team to be unlocked even beyond what we have seen. And the other thing I'm going to say is, even if they're not going to get Durant, they are still in position to make a trade that could really help them. They have the expiring contract of Dario Saric, who will be back this year. I don't know what he's going to be able to give them coming off the ACL. He will be back. He's a sort of a forgotten man, but because people, they let JaVale McGee go. And it was like, oh my gosh, they just let JaVale McGee. He was a really valuable backup. I was like, well, it's because they're getting Saric back. Like, don't forget about Saric. Mm-hmm. I mean, he should be able to help them. He's a quality player. I'm not going to spend much more time, but he's also a trade chip. They have a number of other tradable contracts like Landry Shamet, Jay Crowder, and they own all of their picks going forward. And they're openly on the record as not being super duper invested in the draft. And even though I'm
interesting strategy,
I agree. Also, they signed Josh Okogie. I know he's been an underachiever. I like him as a player. I'm not going to say more than that, but I think you could present the case that the Suns are not a finished product, either in what their team can do as what their roster actually has and what they can do going forward. One thing to watch, I think, is interesting is, do they sign Cam Johnson, who's extension eligible, to an extension? They are another team that has not paid the luxury tax in over a decade. I think 2010 or 11. I think 2010 was last time. Actually, I have it right here. I will tell you. The last time they paid the luxury tax was 2010. And so they're going to be in the luxury tax significantly this year. But obviously going forward, that's a question mark. And that will affect. Also, if you sign Cam Johnson to a extension, you make him very hard to trade.
Makes it harder to trade him.
So we'll see what they think about this roster and what they do with that one.
Well, and let's see what happens with DeAndre Ayton too, because they certainly didn't make that a pleasant negotiating experience for anybody involved. Going back all the way to, you reported, Brian, on it last fall. It wasn't fun then, and it certainly was much less fun the way it was handled, both in the immediate aftermath of that Game 7 loss and then into free agency. So let's see if there's any lingering after effects of that as well. There's just a lot A lot going on there.
All right.
Yeah, and look, I love Bridges too, and I agree with you. I think there's more there, but I also covered a playoff series in which in their last 3 losses, he scored in single digits in each game. He shrunk along with a lot of other guys on that roster, Chris Paul primarily. He shrunk as that series went on against Dallas. Now, young player, you're not going to be great in every playoff series, but he's got a lot to prove coming off of that. I would say him and Cam Johnson are the 2 still ascending. Well, and Ayton, but I just don't think Ayton's going to be there that much longer.
We'll see.
The way those negotiations went down that's not a long-term marriage.
They're definitely a TBD, but the fact that they are a TBD and they haven't gotten better when they have Chris Paul as one of their key pieces who's going into a season where he'll be 38 during next year's playoffs, that makes them a loser for me.
All right. A couple of players that we thought didn't have the greatest summer. One of them is Kyrie Irving. Kyrie, I don't know what he wanted, but he didn't want a 1-year contract. He wasn't able to get an extension with the Nets that he was willing to accept. He sought some sort of sign and trade if he had opted out of his contract. He wasn't able to find that. He opted back into the Nets. The Nets with Durant, I think had some trade discussions with him. I think, the Lakers, there were some talks there that wasn't able to get done. And so now he's, in this position where he's like, oh yeah, everything's fine. Status quo works for me. He might end up coming he might have a great season. He might be highly incentivized to do so and have his best season in a while. And he may end up with wonderful options because there's a lot of teams with cap space next year, but I wouldn't say this summer went the way he was envisioning.
I think you're the master of understatement. It went so well that he's staying with Brooklyn, and his best buddy KD says, you know what? Get me the hell out of here. That's all you need to know. That's how well things went.
And he didn't have, and his Nike contract is ending and not being renewed, and he couldn't get any long-term contract. So he's financially.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was the first time Kyrie could really look around and see that there wasn't dramatic interest in him, right? Like the Nets basically said, go find a trade, boss. And, the Lakers were the only team that was really desperate enough to be willing to pay him a long-term deal. That, I don't think it was a coincidence. It went from that to opting in the next day. It was like, all right, this is what I got to do.
Why were the Lakers so eager to in part to trade for Kyrie? Because I got a feeling the next guy who's on your list.
Well, right, I actually had a different guy than that guy. But to me, I think LeBron is a loser of the summer. And I think it's for what you were alluding to, in that obviously the Lakers made this catastrophically bad Westbrook trade a year ago. We talked about Russ last week. We don't need to get into that any further. But if you're LeBron going into your age 38 season, and the Lakers this summer, while I think we all agree they made better moves than last summer because they signed guys that were all 10 years younger than the guys they signed last summer, they still signed Lonnie Walker, who is a project young wing. Yeah. He was the one above minimum signing they made. Like Damian Jones has played better the last couple of years. Like he's an interesting minimum signing as a center, but they're all minimum signings.
You signed a bunch of guys last year. One of them worked out in Malik Monk, and you lost him.
That's right. And now you've signed a bunch of younger, better bets as minimum players, but this still is a roster that's filled out with minimum players that has one guy, again, for more than the minimum, and Lonnie Walker, who I have not really seen much to think he's going to be that great for them. And Talen Horton, obviously Kendrick Nunn didn't even play last year. Talen Horton-Tucker was a disappointment last year. Then you've got LeBron and AD. And if you're LeBron, you're looking around at this team and you're saying, we're a team that is not good enough. Like we're not good enough to be anywhere near the kind of place I want to be. And they don't really have a path to doing that, short of this Kyrie thing falling in their lap eventually, which I don't think it's going to happen. And frankly, even if he gets there, I don't know if they're still good enough because of the weaknesses they have around those three guys then. So to me, just looking at it, if you're LeBron, you're going into your age 38 season. And to me, it's looking like, while he's going to get the scoring title or the all-time scoring title if he's healthy, from a win standpoint, it feels like it's headed towards another lost season for him. And me looking at it, if I'm him, I have to look at that as a disappointment and as him as one of the losers of this offseason, at least.
Let me ask you something. So in the last week, there's all these stuff about the Pacers didn't get DeAndre Ayton, so they had this cap space. They had $30 million in cap space, so they talked to the Lakers about doing a Westbrook trade, and they couldn't agree to it. I don't know if it's going to happen now, but it could be revisited. Let's not worry about what the Lakers would send out. Let's just say that they were able to execute a trade where they got the two players that were rumored to be headed there, Buddy Hield, who obviously they've been attached to for over a year now,
who they should have gotten last summer.
Clearly, I don't want. I'm almost going to ban talk about the Westbrook trade going forward. Okay. I think, and Miles Turner. So
I'm not banning that Westbrook trade or the Rockets Westbrook trade. I'm still going to hit on all those.
All right. Miles Turner and Buddy Hield. Let's just say, for the sake of a discussion, let's say they're able to pull that trade. Let's not focus on they have to give up 2 firsts or whatever.
Sure.
Right.
Where are the Lakers if they swap out Russell Westbrook and they have Hield and Miles Turner? Because I think they're a significantly better team.
Absolutely. But how many games does Anthony Davis play? How many games does LeBron play?
Well,
Anthony Davis, if he plays 40 games,
if Anthony Davis and LeBron aren't great, it doesn't matter.
This is the better question. They obviously are a better team if they trade 2 guys that are either decent to good NBA players for a guy that currently is not. So yes, they're a better team and probably a significantly better team. The question is, what does that mean? Like, is that team better than Minnesota? Maybe. Like, maybe they're better. Is that team better than Denver? I would say no. Is that team better than the Clippers? Absolutely not. Is that team better than Memphis? I would say probably not. Is that team better than Golden State? I would say probably not. Right?
Dallas?
So, like, Dallas, that team's better than Dallas. But, like, again, you're talking about...
Not if Luka's the MVP of the league.
Well, I don't know, man. If Anthony Davis and LeBron are awesome, which,
Dallas,
again...
We just talked about Dallas taking a big step back. My point is, we're talking about the Lakers with that trade. To me, the Lakers go from being a team that's clearly in the play-in to one that's somewhere between, like, 4 and 8.
Clearly in the play-in. They weren't in the play-in. We can't assume the Lakers even make the play-in.
Okay. You're now going into, like, hyper Laker hate territory. What I'm saying is,
I joked that our Lakers beat writer's nickname was Mac 11 last year. I ended up being right.
I understand. My point is, right now, the Lakers are a team that they're going to be in the play-in tournament mix. Okay. That's to me what their ceiling is. They're not a top 6 team in the West.
I agree.
If they trade for Miles Turner and Buddy Hield, they go from that being their ceiling to a team that I think could maybe get to around 4th in the West and be like a mid-tier playoff team. But
they need that kind of a trade to be relevant in the West.
And if AD and LeBron are great, which
I'm saying if
very possible. If those guys are great, they're a contender.
No, that's my point though. They're not a contender, I don't think, with that trade. That's what I'm saying. If you're saying a team is 4th or 5th in the West after they make that trade, that doesn't make them a contender. It makes them a much better team in the short term. No. But that's the thing. No, that it's a very important thing, because you're then trading, because the part you said, will set aside what they have to trade. You can't set aside what they have to trade because they barely have any. They barely have anything left to trade. And if they trade their assets in to get guys that make them a pretty good team instead of an okay team, that's just that's pushing the cart down the road a year and you're getting to my
point. You're getting to my point. My point is, the Lakers first have to evaluate how good they would be after that trade. And then they have to evaluate, okay, well, how much are we willing to pay to get to that level?
Right.
And I think they've done that. I think they've done that. And at this point, the price is not worth it to them.
I think the Lakers' best path to contention is to not make one of these trades unless it does happen. It can happen to get Kyrie, because for all of his issues, he's a difference making player, and wait for this season to be over and go to LeBron and say, hey, LeBron, we need you to do what James Harden did and take a little less money next summer and allow us the ability to add pieces around you that can make us actually be a championship level team. That is their best path. These make good moves in the meantime are going to just sabotage them on both ends.
Or they could do this. They could see what Kendrick Nunn looks like. I'm not saying he's going to save their franchise, but he hadn't played. They could see what he looks like. They could see what Lonnie Walker looks like. They could see how good LeBron and AD are. And if they get to January and they're like in fighting 7th, then they could reevaluate. And as far as Westbrook, if he wants to play the role, play the role. If he doesn't want to play the role, we'll see ya. That's also a path that they could take too, and then evaluate mid-season whether they want to do those trade to do a trade like that. Because that trade for Minnesota, like I don't know what Indiana's going to do with their cap space, but that trade might not go away. That trade might be there in a couple of months.
No, I mean that trade's probably not going anywhere. But again, it's like are you trying to make moves to just be an okay team? Or are you trying to make moves to be a championship level team? That's why, to me, at this point in LeBron's career, beyond the obvious short-term individual accolade of being the all-time scoring leader in the history of the league, winning championships is what he is sort of set the standard at, right? Being in the finals, winning championships. Yeah. That's, to me, completely off the board with this team, which makes him a loser of the offseason.
Okay, we got to wrap this up. But I will say that the thing that complicates this whole thing is when LeBron has the extension, because if he doesn't sign and doesn't explain why, and we go into media day with LeBron not extending, it's going to cause a pall over the organization, even though, as you just said, Bontemps, when you sit there and look at the whole sphere, the whole field, it's not actually maybe the worst decision. It might be the best decision, not only for him, but also for the Lakers. And it's not like he needs the money. This is not like when he went back to Cleveland in 2014 and he wanted to sign contracts and not only put pressure on the Cavs, but made sure he was going to get the maximum amount of dollars because he had just left money on the table in Miami. It's not about the money anymore. Obviously, he's going to want money. He's not playing for the minimum, but that's something to keep in mind. Okay. Thank you for listening to the Hoop Collective podcast. Mazel tov, McMahon. Safe travels, Bontemps. We will talk to you in 2 weeks, unless there's a big trade or a massive maneuver, and then there will be an emergency podcast. Thank you for listening and hanging in with us for so long. Take care.
Adios, amigos.